I just didn't like her, seeing her so distressed and frightened, unhappy.
A casualty of their mindset was the expulsion of a frail, older person.
It's unbelievable, really, that these sort of things are able to go on.
And what we're seeing is a damning reflection on the care industry.
Britain has an ageing population, and now over 230,000 older people live in full-time residential care. Many have complex conditions like dementia or a disability that leaves them vulnerable. It means they often have to rely on family to communicate their needs to nursing and care home managers.
But what happens when that relationship breaks down because family feel that concerns simply aren't being dealt with properly? We've learned that for some, the results can be devastating.
This programme can exclusively reveal that hundreds of families claim they've been banned from visiting the residential homes where their parents live for complaining about poor care.
He was a great sportsman. I mean,
Paul Doolan's dad, Terry, moved into a care home in Somerset when he was 90. He had cancer, was registered blind, needed hearing aids and used a wheelchair. Paul visited him at the home every week for 3 years before being banned via email.
So this is the place that you had to meet your dad when you were banned from visiting him in his care home?
That's right.
The ban meant Paul Doolan was only allowed to meet his father at this club, away from the care home. The meetings were watched by a care worker.
Well, it was humiliating. I mean, I'd always had a good relationship with Dad, and it was completely unnecessary. Yeah, it was upsetting. It was deeply upsetting.
When you saw the email telling you that you were banned from the care home where your father was living full time, what was your reaction?
Well, disbelief. As I say, I think I read it 3 or 4 times. I just couldn't believe what I was reading.
The email stated that Paul would have to cease visits within the home where his dad was living. The ban would take effect immediately. The home accused Paul Doolan of demonstrating unacceptable behaviour, though it did not explain what that unacceptable behaviour was. Paul Doolan claims the real reason he was banned from visiting the home was because he complained about lapses in care, of which he kept a log. One allegation was that on weekly visits, he rarely found his father's hearing aids in working condition.
Either the battery had run out or they weren't clean. It took me about a quarter of an hour to sort this out before I could start speaking properly to him. Otherwise, I was having to shout at him. For the rest of the week when I wasn't there, I mean, he probably sat in total silence. And we all know that stimulation is very important. I mean, he had a degree of dementia. And, you know, to be deprived of your hearing is one of your principal senses.
With the aid of a charity, the care home was persuaded 2 months later to allow Paul back inside. His visits continued to be chaperoned.
So, Jamie, these are 2 examples.
We showed a lawyer who specialises in helping families with loved ones in care the email banning Paul Doolan from visiting his dad's care home.
If I was a family member receiving this, I would be quite shocked.
Gemma Garside says she sees hundreds of cases similar to Paul's because care and nursing home residents have fewer enforceable rights than, say, someone renting a flat from a private landlord.
You have a contract with the care home, with the resident and the local authority if they're funding it. You don't have the rights as a tenant. The contract is written by the care home. They set the terms and the conditions, and you have to abide by those.
So, if an elderly person or their family break the terms of that contract, a nursing and care home may well be within its rights to ban family members like Paul from their premises.
The nursing home says that it had to ban you, not because you were making complaints, but because your behaviour was unacceptable, and the implication is that you were threatening. What do you say to that?
No, I refute that completely. My dad had always done his best for me, and I was out to do my best for my father. And the care home fees were fairly hefty, as you will appreciate. And I thought it was the least they could do to ensure that he could hear properly.
Terry Doolan eventually moved to another care home. Paul says his visits were not chaperoned there and that he had a good relationship with the staff. But just 3 months after arriving, Terry passed away. We asked the home where Terry Doolan lived to respond to the allegations made in this film. They said during the time in question, the home followed all regulations set by the Care Quality Commission and all guidelines set by our local authority.
What happened to Paul and his dad, Terry, is obviously a deeply upsetting personal experience. But what I want to know is how often situations like theirs arise and how it is that nursing homes seem to be able to take what appear to be such extreme measures.
They think all these things exist.
Eileen Chubb, a former care worker, campaigns for better regulation of the care industry. She says she hears from around 60 families a year in a similar position to that of Paul and Terry.
The balance of power is totally weighed against the relative. Raising concerns and whatever the care home says is taken at face value by all of the authorities. So basically the resident and the relative are the people with the least power, and that is a major part of the problem.
Relatives we've spoken to, like Paul Doolan, say that they were only subject to visitor bans because they raised concerns about the quality of care. But we've also come across families who say that their elderly parents have been subject to evictions because their children raised complaints about care. When you first got to the care,
Angela and Mervyn Eastman claim their mum was evicted from her previous nursing home because they lodged a single formal complaint about poor care.
Most of the time I was in tears because I just didn't like her, seeing her so distressed and frightened, unhappy. It was awful, wasn't it, Mervyn? You know, she was in a bad way.
Karina Eastman suffers from dementia. In 2013, she moved into a nursing home in Essex. The Eastmans claim that a revolving door of management there, 4 in 1 year, led to lapses in care, including a failure to properly look after a gash on Karina's leg.
As time went on, this turned into an ulcer. Then her legs began to swell to double their size and her legs became blistered.
that sounds really painful.
It was, and it also creates quite a smell. And I felt that because of the lack of staff, and they didn't have the time, they weren't bathing her legs. So hence, you know, the blisters were bursting.
Angela kept a log of their growing concerns, but it was the merger of 2 units at the nursing home that finally led to them making a formal complaint. The Eastmans claim that with no notice, residents who displayed aggressive behaviour were moved into the same area of the home as their mum.
I saw my mum pressed against the corner, absolutely traumatised. She was like this. I eventually got to her after some pushing and shoving to try and make a gangway, and she was in tears. Because of her dementia, she couldn't understand where all of these people had come from, why all the noise, why all the shouting, and she was traumatised. I managed to get her to the room, but she wouldn't stop crying.
Mervyn wrote to the nursing home. It was the Eastmans' first formal complaint. 48 hours later, they got a response. It said there had been a thorough investigation into the events and that the home couldn't meet the unreasonable demands placed on it by Mervyn and Angela. It said Karina was to be given 1 month's notice to leave the home.
Do you think that there's anything that you did that was unreasonable or made you difficult to deal with?
Absolutely not. No way.
And I agree. They were fearful. They were defensive. And therefore, the casualty of that, the casualty of their mindset was the expulsion of a frail older person.
Karina is now living at a new home where she's happy and her leg has fully healed. We put the allegations made in this film to the previous care home where Karina lived. They said, "Our duty of care under the Health and Social Care Act is to ensure that we are always able to meet individuals' needs, and where we cannot, we are compelled to make unenviable and difficult decisions. Sadly, we could no longer meet Mrs. Eastman's needs. We are a highly stable service with consistent management. We have been rated good by CQC in the last 2 inspections." They add that they helped Karina find a new nursing home where her needs could be better met. Campaigner Eileen Chubb believes better transparency within the industry will protect families and residents. She wants the government's inspectorate, the CQC, to publish how many bans and evictions individual homes put in place.
A care home can only be measured by how it deals with concerns when they arise. The best care home in the world can have a problem, somebody bad could come and work there, with the best intent in the world. It's how they deal with these issues when they're raised. That's what makes a good company and a good care home. And what we're seeing is a damning reflection on the care industry.
Nursing and care home companies say contracts must be flexible to allow homes to quickly move elderly people if their health worsens and they need a different type of care. The man who represents the industry adds that evictions and relative visitor bans are only issued very rarely and ideally with caution.
There should be a very clear explanation as to what has precipitated this action by the care home. So I think clarity and really being very clear with people, and also you need to give people the respect of saying things to their face if there is a problem.
But with the true scale of visitor bans and evictions unknown, would the industry support publishing the numbers?
I think perhaps the Care Quality Commission may look in the future to seeing whether it should collate this information. Perhaps they, as the regulator, are the most sensible place to have that sort of data.
What's stopping nursing care homes from making that information available themselves?
Nothing.
What unites all of the families I've spoken to during this investigation is that they feel powerless, isolated and scared. With no one currently keeping track of the number of visitor bans and evictions in place nationally, that situation is likely to continue well into the future.